they took his name first. Not as an accident, not as oversight, as policy. The Veth Karen had been stripping human designations for 11 years. Since the settling, since the day, their harvest ships descended through every cloud layer on every inhabited world, and the guns that were supposed to stop them turned out to be museum pieces pointed at the sky. Names were the first thing to go. Names implied continuity, implied that the thing on the table before the procedure was the same thing that would walk away after it. The Veth Karen found that fiction inconvenient, so the man who had been Chase Jackson became Unit 7 Blue, and the techs in the white coats, human techs, the collaborator kind, the worst kind, prepared his body for the augmentation with the same brisk efficiency they brought to calibrating sensor arrays. He remembered the table. Cold alloy against his spine, the smell of the facility, which was antiseptic, over something older and biological, like a wound that had been cleaning itself for years. He remembered one of the techs, young, couldn't have been more than 22, who paused before inserting the first subcutaneous anchor and looked at Chase with something that might have been an apology. Didn't say it, looked away, did the job. He remembered thinking, "I'm going to remember your face." That was the last coherent thought for a long time. The augmentation the Veth Karen called the Draconis Protocol was not technically a weapon. That was the loophole they used in their own internal ethics framework. A framework that Chase, years later, would learn was 40 pages of bureaucratic doublespeak designed specifically to allow them to do exactly what they were doing. The protocol was a combat chassis overlay. The subject's skeletal structure was reinforced with a lattice of Veth Karen composite that the translation matrices rendered as hypercalcium bone analog, which meant nothing to Chase at the time, and everything to him later when he realized it meant his bones could now stop a high-caliber round without breaking. Neural dampeners were threaded through the prefrontal cortex to suppress autonomic fear response. Muscle fiber cables, thinner than thread and stronger than bridge wire, were woven through his existing musculature and attached to a reactor pack the size of a deck of cards that sat flush against his lower back and never got warm and never ran out of charge and hummed at a frequency he could feel in his back teeth. They called the finished product Dragon Blue, and they pointed it at their enemies. For 8 months, he pointed where they aimed. The Veth Karen had rivals, other collector species, a hierarchy of predators who disputed which of them had the right to harvest which worlds. Chase fought those rivals. He was very good at it. The protocol made him fast in a way that was difficult for normal humans to watch. Not blurry, just wrong, occupying positions faster than the eye expected. The neural dampeners meant he worked through scenarios that should have triggered panic as if they were arithmetic problems. He was effective. He was consistent. He was, by the Veth Karen's internal assessments, a satisfactory return on their biochemical investment. He was also paying attention. This was the thing the Veth Karen had not adequately modeled. The neural dampeners suppressed fear, not cognition. Chase Jackson was still in there, running behind everything, watching, cataloging. He noted the patrol rotation schedules. He noted which sections of the Veth Karen command structure communicated through which relay nodes. He noted the way Dr. Emmerich, the senior scientist who had designed the protocol, a woman with close-cropped gray hair and the flat professional calm of someone who had stopped asking certain questions about her own work, sometimes stayed late in the secondary lab on the eastern end of the facility. He noted what she was working on. She was working on the kill switch. Every protocol unit had one. It was a Veth Karen standard practice. You did not hand a combat chassis to a human without a reliable method of deactivating it. The switch was biological, keyed to a compound that broke down the neural dampener lattice and triggered an acute systemic shutdown that the Veth Karen's documentation described as peacefully permanent. Dr. Emmerich was refining the delivery mechanism, making it faster, making it work at range. Chase watched her work for 3 months. Then he stopped letting them aim him. It started small. A patrol that ended 30 seconds early because he had reported, falsely, that the target zone was clear. A relay node that he had been assigned to protect that developed a fault he had personally introduced. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that triggered the watch protocols they ran on all combat units. Just small wrongnesses accumulating quietly, while he waited for the right moment the way water waits behind a dam, patient, certain of its own weight. The Mantis cyborg was the Veth Karen's answer to Dragon Blue. not a human augment. The Veth-Karen did not trust their own biology the way they trusted their technology. But a full mechanical chassis, 8 feet of composite and sensor array, armed with limb blades that could cut through the reinforced alloy plating the Veth-Karen used on their interior bulkheads. It was what they sent when they needed something neutralized and wanted to avoid the ambiguity of a human unit that might theoretically be having a complicated day. The Mantis was not complicated. It had no day. It had target parameters and execution routines, and a response time of 40 milliseconds. Chase had been watching it for as long as he had been watching everything else. He had noticed that the Mantis's gyroscopic stabilization system recalibrated every 6.3 seconds. During that recalibration window, 120 milliseconds, barely longer than a blink, its balance was compromised. Not catastrophically, not in a way that Veth-Karen had ever thought worth addressing, because no human opponent had ever been fast enough to exploit it, and no Veth-Karen opponent had ever been interested in close-quarters engagement with a machine that could bisect them at range. Chase was fast enough. He had been fast enough for 8 months. He had been waiting for a reason. The reason came on a Tuesday. He knew it was a Tuesday because he had been quietly maintaining an internal calendar since the 3rd week of his captivity, marking days by the shift changes of the human techs. And Tuesdays were when the young tech, the one who had almost apologized, came in for the early rotation. Chase had not forgotten his face. He had also, over 8 months of careful attention, learned his name, Anders. He had learned that Anders had a sister in the Eastern resettlement camps. He had learned that Anders had taken the collaborator work because it was that or the camps himself, and that Anders sent half his ration credits back to the sister every cycle, and that Anders sometimes sat in the break room at the end of a long shift and stared at nothing in a way that Chase recognized, because he had done the same thing in the before time when he had still had a name. On Tuesday, Dr. Emmerich finished the refined delivery mechanism for the kill switch compound. On Tuesday, Chase Jackson decided it was time to stop waiting. He moved through the facility at 0340, which was the deepest point of the overnight rotation, when the Veth-Karen supervisors were in their rest cycles, and the human staff ran the floor with minimal oversight. The protocol made him quiet in the same way it made him fast. Not supernaturally, just efficiently, every footfall calculated. Every motion trimmed of the small waste that normal human movement accumulated without noticing. He felt the reactor pack hum against his spine. His bones did not ache. They had not ached since the augmentation, which was something he had not decided yet how to feel about. He reached the secondary lab without triggering a single alert. Dr. Emmerich was there. She was almost always there. She looked up when he entered, and something moved behind her eyes. Not quite fear, not quite surprise. More like a confirmation. Like something she had been expecting for long enough that its arrival felt less like a shock than a punctuation mark. "You've been watching me," she said. "For 3 months," Chase said. "The kill switch." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "It works at 40 meters now. I finished it tonight." "I know." He had read the notation on her console from across the room while she completed the final calibration test. "I need you to destroy it. If I do that, I know what happens if you do that." He looked at her steadily. The neural dampeners kept his voice flat, which he had learned to use like a tool. Flatness was more frightening than heat, in the right context. "I'm not asking because I'm afraid of it. I'm asking because it's the only thing stopping you from walking out of here." She stared at him. He waited. He was very good at waiting. What Dr. Emmerich said next was not what he had expected. What she said was, "There are 11 other protocol units in the Eastern Wing." He had not known that. He had suspected it, had noted the increased supply requisitions for augmentation materials, the expanded security presence around Corridor J. But he had not confirmed it. He let nothing show on his face, but something shifted in the way he was standing, some small recalibration that she apparently read clearly. "They're newer than you," she said. "The dampeners are stronger, they won't." She stopped, started again. "They're not where you are. They won't help themselves." "But they could be helped," Chase said. She looked at the kill switch apparatus on her console. She looked at Chase. She made the kind of decision that people make when they have been waiting for permission to make it for a very long time. She picked up the apparatus and she broke it against the edge of the console. The alarm went off 40 seconds later. Chase had expected 20. He used the extra time productively. The Mantis cyborg came through the wall of the secondary lab exactly the way he had anticipated. Not through the door, because the Veth Karen had designed their combat chassis for direct line pursuit, and walls were merely a mild inconvenience. And it was already moving at combat speed. Limb blades deployed, sensor array sweeping. Chase was not where the sensor array expected him to be. He had moved 3 meters to the left during the 2-second window between the wall breach and the sensor sweep completion, and he was now inside the Mantis's optimal engagement range, which the Veth Karen had never designed it to defend, because nothing was supposed to be able to get there. 6.3 seconds, he counted. At the 120 millikenton recalibration window, he hit the Mantis at the junction of its primary gyroscopic housing and its central power conduit, with everything the protocol had given him. Not a punch, exactly. More like a focused compression event, applied to a very specific 12-centimeter target area. The Mantis went down. It took 2.4 seconds to get back up, because it was very well built, and Chase had not expected to finish this in one movement. But he had used those 2.4 seconds to move to the only position in the room where the Mantis's limb blades could not reach him without overextending its chassis, which he had identified 3 months ago when he had first mapped the lab's geometry against the Mantis's known range of motion. He hit it in the same place again. It went down again. It took longer to get up this time. He hit it a third time and it stayed down. He stood over it for a moment, breathing in the specific way the protocol recommended for post-engagement recovery. 4 counts in, 6 counts out, and he noticed that his hands were shaking, not from the fight. The neural dampeners had handled the fight fine. They were shaking from something the dampeners could not touch. Something that lived deeper than fear. Something that had been waiting 9 months to express itself, and was now doing so in the only way his modified physiology allowed. He let them shake, he had earned it. The Veth Karen sent 3 more units before he reached Corridor J. The goons, the facility security. Human bodies in Veth Karen armor, following orders because the orders were the only structure that kept their lives from collapsing. And Chase understood this. He understood it completely, and he made sure not to do permanent damage. This was a decision that cost him time, and cost him a long gash across his left shoulder from a blade he could have avoided if he had been willing to be less careful, and he decided it was the right cost. He had enough permanent damage to carry. He did not need to add more. Anders was in the Corridor J security station when Chase arrived. He had gone pale, the color of old chalk. His hands were on the console in the not reaching for anything position that people adopt when they want to make very clear they are not reaching for anything. Chase looked at him. "Your sister's name is Marin," he said. "Eastern Camp, Block 14. Anders said nothing. His breathing was very controlled. "The access codes for the wing containment," Chase said. "You have them. I've watched you use them." A long silence. The alarm was still going, somewhere distant. Time was a resource he was spending. "If I give them to you," Anders said, "they'll know I gave them to you." "Yes. And if you get the others out, then there'll be enough of us that it won't matter what they know," Chase said. "The Veth Karen run these facilities on the assumption that the people inside them are isolated. 11 protocol units are not isolated." Anders stared at him for another 3 seconds. Then he typed in the codes. The 11 protocol units in Corridor J were newer. Their dampeners were stronger. They stood in their containment cells with the flat, navigational calm of people who had been told that this was simply how existence worked. And Chase looked at each of them through the plexalloy barrier and saw himself, 9 months ago, in that first week, before he had started cataloging and paying attention and refusing to stop being a person. He did not give a speech. He was not built for speeches, and the dampeners would have flattened it anyway. What he said was, "My name is Chase Jackson. I'm getting you out." He said it 11 times. The Veth Karen had 53 personnel in the facility. They were well-armed and well-organized, and they had the structural advantage of having designed the building they were defending. 12 protocol units, moving together, hit them like weather, not like a war. Chase had been in things that were called wars, and this was not that. This was more like a very detailed argument about who the building belonged to, conducted at high speed with significant property damage, and it ended the way it was always going to end once the initial conditions had been established, which was with the Veth Karen personnel in custody in the secondary lab. which had the strongest containment protocols of any room in the facility, and with 12 augmented humans standing in the gray pre-dawn outside the facility's main entrance, breathing the outside air for the first time in months, looking at a sky that was doing nothing in particular except being a sky. One of the 11, a woman named Reyes, he would learn, who had been a structural engineer before the settling, and had spent her captivity mentally redesigning the facility's load-bearing architecture out of what she described as professional habit, looked at Chase and said, "What now?" Chase looked at the sky. The reactor pack hummed against his spine. His hands were not shaking anymore. "There are other facilities," he said. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then, "How many?" "The Veth Karen's Eastern Distribution Network has 14 installations within a 200-kilometer radius," Chase said. He had noted this from the facility's administrative documents. He had noted a great many things. "You've been planning this," Reyes said. "I've been paying attention," Chase said, "for 9 months." The sun came up, which was something it had been doing every day for the entire 9 months, patient and reliable and completely indifferent to the plans of the Veth Karen. And Chase Jackson stood in it and felt the warmth of it on his modified face and thought about all the things that had been taken from him and all the things that had not, and decided that the second list was still longer than the first. He thought about Anders, who had typed in the codes, and was probably going to need somewhere to go now. He thought about Dr. Emmerich, who had broken the kill switch against the edge of the console, with the decisiveness of someone who had been needing to break something for a very long time. He thought about Marin in Block 14, who did not know yet that her brother had done something useful with his terrible situation. He thought about 14 facilities within a 200-kilometer radius. "Okay," said Reyes, and the way she said it made Chase think she had been waiting a long time to say okay to something that mattered. "Okay, what do we need?" Chase rolled his left shoulder. The gash ached dully through the dampeners. Not badly, but enough to remind him that it was there, that he was there. That the body doing the aching belonged to a person with a name who had decided, 9 months ago on a cold table in an antiseptic room, that he was going to remember every face. "We need maps," he said, "and we need time." He paused. "We have time," he said, and he was right.